Hello, Jess here for Hero Arts with a card using the Sugar Skull stamp set and an old but often forgotten technique. So let's get started. First, I lined up the patterned inside skull stamps on the lid of my MISTI. I placed a piece of white cardstock in the MISTI and then placed a post-it note over one of the stamps. I inked the other stamp using the Hero Arts Ombre pink to red ink pad. Then I removed the inky post-it and placed a clean post-it over the stamp before closing the lid and stamping the other skull. I did a few cards with these stamps earlier, and even though I cleaned them well, I like to make extra sure I won't accidentally transfer ink anywhere by covering them with post-its. I stamped it twice to make sure I got good coverage. Next, I repeated the process for the other skull, but inked it with the Hero Arts Ombre Pool to Navy ink pad. Then I cleaned off my stamps with an absorber cloth and prepped the card panel with my powder tool. I stamped both skulls with Versamark and heat embossed over the ombre inks with clear embossing powder. Using a stamp positioner tool ensured that the Versamark lined up perfectly over the ombre inks. Then I placed the panel back inside my MISTI and stamped the skull outline over each skull with Versamark. I heat embossed those with white embossing powder. The next step was done freehand, but you could also use a MISTI or other stamp positioner for greater accuracy. I stamped the roses and leaves from the set using the same ombre pink to red and ombre pool to navy ink pads. Then I freehand stamped over them with Versamark and heat embossed them with clear embossing powder. I also stamped the little curly Q designs with Versamark and heat embossed those with white embossing powder. Then it was time for the scary part. Well, not really scary, but it's definitely a little unnerving the first time you try it. This technique has many different names, but most commonly I've heard it referred to as the Joseph Coat technique. I temporarily adhered my panel to a piece of scrap paper and then swiped my Hero Arts Intense Black ink all over the panel. You can use any dark ink for this technique and can also apply it with a brayer for slightly less messy application. You want to apply it and make sure the ink totally covers the panel. The design will pretty much disappear at this point, but don't panic. Once you've got good coverage, grab a paper towel and carefully rub the embossed area. Any area that is covered with embossing powder will resist the ink and can be easily wiped off to reveal the design. I love how the ombre pattern really pops against the black background. I set the panel aside to dry completely while I worked on the rest of the card. Next, I took another panel of cardstock and placed it on a piece of scrap paper. I'm working on a craft mat, so technically I could work on it directly and just wipe all the ink away, but this is a little easier cleanup when you have so much ink everywhere. I used the same ombre pink to red ink pad to swipe ink along both sides of the panel. I wasn't terribly fussy about the stripes, I just wanted a hint of ombre for my background. Then I took a scrap of black cardstock and stamped the top hat from Sugar Skulls onto it with Versamark before heat embossing it with white embossing powder. I also added a little flourish to the hat and heat embossed it with the same embossing powder before die cutting it with a coordinating die. Next, I stamped the sentiment with the ombre pink to red ink pad and trimmed it down to a fishtail flag. Finally, it was time to assemble my card. Off camera, I trimmed the black panel down to 4 by 5.5 and adhered the striped panel to a card base. I adhered the black panel to my card base and added the hat and sentiment with foam mounting tape. You can see that I also wiped away some of the excess powder from my powder tool with a Swiffer cloth. Then I added a little Spectrum Noir clear sparkle to the skulls, leaves, and roses, and finished the card with a few ombre red sequins. You can find more information on the products I used today at the Hero Arts blog, and there's a link to the blog in the YouTube description below. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, have a fabulous day and happy crafting. Bye!